Betrayal and Redemption: How I Turned My Heartache into Strength. My phone buzzed incessantly, and I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. There were 14 missed calls, most from Rachel. I hadn't responded to any of them, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to process what I'd just heard. "I've been seeing someone else," she had said, her voice unnervingly calm. "His name is Jay. And I'm sorry, but I need a real man. Someone who knows what he wants and goes after it." I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought it was a joke. Or maybe, deep down, I was already prepared for this moment. But hearing the words leave her mouth felt like a punch to the chest. The smirk that tugged at the corner of her lips made it clear that she wasn't sorry at all. She was pleased. Proud, even. And then came the real gut punch. My friends. The ones I thought would be there for me, the ones who'd seen Rachel and me together for years, the ones who knew me better than anyone. They took her side. They told me I wasn't good enough. That I was too immature, too focused on my own little world, too predictable. I could feel my hands shaking as I stared at my phone. The messages from Jacob, from Chloe, all the people who had laughed at my jokes, shared beers with me on weekends, who had known all along about Rachel's betrayal. And they chose to side with her. Something inside me snapped. But instead of raising my voice, instead of throwing a fit, I just smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief or a smile of sadness. It was the smile of someone who had just realized something bigger. Something I had missed. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Rachel's smirk echoed in my mind as I walked down the street, not toward my car, but away from everything. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing: sometimes, losing everything is exactly what it takes to figure out what you never really had. The signs were so subtle at first that I almost convinced myself I was overthinking things. Rachel had always been a bit distant at times, busy with work, stressing about deadlines, but lately, it was different. It started with little things. She'd suddenly have to stay late at the office more often. She said it was the busy season, but it felt off. It was as if the woman I'd spent years with was slipping away, little by little. And then, there was the perfume. The scent was unfamiliar, sweet and floral, nothing like the one she'd always worn. I remember asking her one evening if she'd bought something new, but she just shrugged it off with a smile and said, "Oh, it's nothing." I wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to a small change. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her clothes started changing, too. Suddenly, she had these outfits I didn't recognize, dresses I hadn't seen before, shoes that didn't look like they belonged in our closet. I didn't want to be the guy who turned into a jealous boyfriend, but I could feel the distance between us growing. Then came the phone. Her phone, once an open book, had become a secret vault. She started keeping it with her at all times, on her lap when we watched TV, on the kitchen counter, never out of arm's reach. And whenever I got close enough to glance at the screen, she'd quickly lock it, her face suddenly stiffening. It wasn't just the phone, though. It was the way she'd pull away when I tried to hug her from behind, the way she'd take calls in the other room, always insisting it was for work. I knew she had a demanding job, but something about the secrecy made my stomach turn. One night, as I was folding laundry on the couch, her phone lit up on the coffee table. The name Jate flashed on the screen, and the preview of the message read, "Miss you already." Last night was. I froze. I didn't want to be the guy who snooped. I've never been that guy. But in that moment, it felt like the universe had just handed me a golden ticket to the truth. I didn't pick it up. I didn't check her messages then. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of a cliff, and the only way to know what was really happening was to take the plunge. That night, when Rachel came home, I didn't wait. I didn't pretend everything was okay. I walked straight into the kitchen, where she was making herself a smoothie, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her blend her fruit like nothing had changed. "Who's Jay?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart was racing. Rachel turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. The smile on her lips was not the soft, loving one I was used to. No, this one was cold, calculating, a smirk that made the blood run cold in my veins. She took a sip of her smoothie, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, but her face didn't change. "Wondering when you'd finally catch on, David," she said, her voice laced with a tone I didn't recognize. "Jay's my boss." I felt my throat tighten. "And?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice, though it was hard. "And yes," she continued, as if she were announcing something trivial. "I've been sleeping with him for the last 2 months." I couldn't even process the words at first. They felt surreal, like she was reading lines from a script I didn't know existed. She wasn't even ashamed. She wasn't sorry. In fact, her next words were almost smug. "I needed a real man," she said, eyes gleaming. "Someone who knows what he wants and goes for it. Not someone who spends his weekends playing video games with Jacob and watching stupid movies." My jaw clenched. The word stung, but something else was bubbling up inside of me. It wasn't anger, at least not at that moment. It was a strange sense of clarity. I didn't feel weak or defeated. I felt awake. I swallowed hard. "Does Chloe know?" Rachel's face twitched slightly. "Oh, she's known for weeks. And most of our friends know, too. They understand. Jay can actually provide a future. Not just dreams and excuses." I could feel the floor drop beneath me. The betrayal wasn't just from Rachel. It was from my friends. They had all known. They had all been in on this. They had watched me, laughed with me, and silently approved of the lies Rachel was feeding me. The sting of that reality burned deeper than anything Rachel could say. But instead of storming out, instead of shouting or crying or making a scene, I just smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile or a sad one. It was a smile of realization. Of release. But before I share what happened next, the moment that changed everything for me, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. With a final glance at Rachel, who was still staring at me with that smirk on her face, I grabbed my keys, walked out, and didn't look back. I had no idea what the next chapter held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. See Luan Ni. Havit BNG Tingon, CMNBN. ChatGPT A with tilde Noi. When I walked back into the apartment, Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, looking every bit the woman I thought I knew, but everything had changed. There she was, calmly sipping her coffee like we weren't standing at the edge of something irreversible. The air felt heavy, charged with the tension of things unsaid. I closed the door behind me and stood still for a moment, just watching her. I didn't even know what to feel anymore: hurt, anger, disbelief. All of those things swirled inside me, but there was one thing that stood out above everything else: clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you realize the truth, and you can no longer deny it. She didn't look up at me immediately. When she did, the same smug smile crept across her face, the one that had haunted me the night I walked out. "You know," she began, her voice surprisingly calm, "I wasn't sure how you were going to react. But now that you're here, I guess it's time to just say it." I couldn't breathe. I waited, but I didn't need to hear any more. She was going to say it, and I was already dreading the words. "I've been seeing Jay," she said, her eyes not leaving mine. "For the past 2 months. She said it like it was the most casual thing in the world, like she was telling me what she had for breakfast. No emotion, no guilt, just cold indifference. And just like that, the air in the room grew colder. My hands clenched at my sides, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. "Jay's my boss," she continued, like she was giving me some sort of justification, though she didn't need to. She didn't care about my feelings, not now, not ever. I needed someone who knew what he wanted, someone who could give me a future. Not someone who spends all their weekends playing video games with Jacob or sitting on the couch watching stupid movies. Her words hit harder than anything I expected. She didn't just cheat, she'd been planning this, rationalizing it in her mind, turning it into something she was entitled to. It wasn't about the affair anymore, it was about her disdain for who I was, how she saw me. The one I had loved, the one I thought I knew, was gone, replaced by this stranger sitting across from me. I'm not sorry, she added, her eyes narrowing just slightly, her smug smile widening. I didn't need to waste my time anymore. You're just not the man I thought you were. I should have said something, anything. I should have screamed. But instead, I just sat there, staring at her. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I wasn't even angry, just numb. And that realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about the betrayal. It was about her not even pretending to care, about how little she respected me. The words that followed came from a place I wasn't sure I recognized in myself. Does Chloe know? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Rachel didn't even flinch. Of course. And Jacob. Everyone knows. They all understand, David. You've had your time. They get it. Jay's the future. Not you. I couldn't believe it. My closest friends, the people I thought I could count on, had known all along. They had stood by her. They had smiled at me, laughed with me, and supported her behind my back. I could feel a quiet rage building up inside me, but it wasn't the kind of rage I expected. It wasn't about her affair, not really. It was about the betrayal on a much larger scale. I had loved her. And she had used that against me, used my trust like it was nothing. But now? Now, I was done. I didn't know what else to say. I could have yelled. I could have begged her to explain herself. But what would that do? She had already made up her mind. She'd already moved on. And me? I was no longer part of her life. Not the way I thought I was. So I just stood up. No dramatics. No outburst. I didn't even look back. Rachel called after me as I reached for my coat. Where are you going? I paused for a moment at the door, staring at her. I'm done, Rachel. I hope you get everything you want. And you know what? Take the apartment too. I'm sure Jay can help with the rent. Her face twisted in surprise, but she didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The silence was all I needed. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of the lies, the manipulation, the selfishness, it all melted away. This wasn't a loss. It was the beginning of something new. Something better. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going back. And for the first time in a long time, that felt good. Before I move on with this story, I want to know, have you ever experienced a betrayal like this? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're ready to hear what happens next, trust me, you won't want to miss it. This story is far from over. The days that followed felt like a blur of noise, constant messages, endless notifications, all demanding my attention. Rachel's texts came first, of course. She bombarded me with explanations, apologies that rang hollow, and accusations that were all too familiar. According to her, everything was my fault. She claimed I was controlling, emotionally distant, and that I had pushed her into the arms of someone else. I didn't respond. It wasn't worth it. But then came the social media storm. I hadn't checked her accounts before, she had always kept her privacy. But now, I couldn't avoid it. Her Instagram was a flood of posts, each one painting me as the villain, the manipulative boyfriend who had emotionally abused her for years. In every post, I saw myself turned into the monster she had crafted in her mind. Her tearful video, where she claimed I had financially ruined her by splitting the bills evenly, was especially laughable. It didn't matter that she had been the one to suggest the arrangement and that she made more money than I did. The internet didn't care. The sympathy was overwhelming, and the comments flooded in, people who didn't know either of us, people who didn't ask questions, just believed her. What cut deeper was the silence from my friends. Jacob, who I had shared everything with, late-night talks, laughter, the bond of a friendship I thought was unbreakable, had sided with her. David, you know it's not personal, right? He texted. Rachel just deserves someone who can give her the life she wants. No mention of how she had lied, how she had betrayed everything we'd built together. And Chloe? She messaged me too, apologizing for not getting involved sooner, claiming they didn't want to hurt me. They didn't want to hurt me? By silently supporting Rachel's lies, they had done more damage than I could ever have imagined. I felt the weight of it all, like 100 bricks had fallen on me at once. My mind raced with anger, confusion, disbelief. But then something shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the way I had been. I wasn't going to beg anyone to believe my side of the story. The truth didn't need to be defended, it just needed to be uncovered. It was Ben who finally snapped me out of my spiral. Ben worked in the same office as Rachel, and although we hadn't been close, we'd exchanged small talk a few times. He reached out after seeing a few of Rachel's posts, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of focus return. David, I know what she's telling everyone. But I think you need to hear the full picture, he said on the phone. Rachel's been playing this game for a long time. You're not the first person she's done this to. Ben went on to explain that Rachel had been using her position at work to manipulate others, focusing on younger employees who were looking for advancement. She had a pattern of getting involved with them, manipulating their professional relationships, and then throwing them under the bus when it suited her. There were others, Ben told me, who had been discarded once they served their purpose, their careers destroyed by Rachel's silent whispers in the right ears. You're not just dealing with a cheating ex, David. You're dealing with someone who's been getting away with this for years. Jay's just the latest in a long line of victims. I was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. The betrayal was no longer just personal. It was systemic. Rachel had built this web of lies, and I had been just one of the flies caught in it. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt determined. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't even about the wreckage of our relationship. It was about exposing the truth. It was about standing up for what was right, even if no one else would. I hung up with Ben, a fire igniting in me that I hadn't felt before. Rachel wasn't just going to walk away from this, pretending she had done nothing wrong. I wasn't going to let her destroy anyone else's life. I began digging. I reached out to a few former colleagues of Rachel's, people who had left the company under questionable circumstances. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. Rachel had systematically taken advantage of people, and Jay was just the latest in a series of men she had manipulated to get ahead. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about power, control, and using people like pawns. As I started to understand the full scope of her deceit, something inside me shifted. The anger I had been holding onto was gone. I wasn't going to let her win by making me the villain. I was going to expose her for who she really was, and in the process, I was going to reclaim my life. Before I share what happened next, the moment that made everything click, I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever uncovered a hidden truth that changed everything for you? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're ready to see how far Rachel's manipulation really goes, hit that like button and stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Just when I thought I had uncovered everything, an unexpected message landed in my inbox. It was from someone named Mrs. J. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, but when I opened the message, my heart skipped a beat. Mrs. J had been quietly following Rachel's pattern of manipulation for years. She had evidence, hard, irrefutable proof, that Rachel had destroyed lives before, using the same tactics she'd used on me. Mrs. J's message was precise and detailed. She explained how Rachel had manipulated not just Jay, but a string of other men before him, climbing her way up the ladder, leaving broken careers in her wake. She had played them, used them, then discarded them when they no longer served her purposes. And now, she had all the evidence to prove it. I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. The anger was for the countless people Rachel had hurt, including me. The relief came from knowing that someone had been watching, someone had been paying attention. Mrs. J wasn't just some random ally. She had worked with meticulous precision, documenting Rachel's behavior, gathering emails, texts, and even security footage that could finally put an end to Rachel's reign of manipulation. Mrs. J wasn't just going to sit quietly either. She had a plan. A plan that would not only expose Rachel, but would also bring down Jay, the man who had been complicit in her lies. The idea of going public with this evidence felt like a lifeline. Rachel had tried to paint me as the villain, to twist the narrative, to turn my life into a story of her victimhood. But now, the truth was about to come to light in a way that couldn't be ignored. A few days later, Mrs. J invited me to a company event, a gathering where all the major players in Rachel's circle would be in attendance. The event was supposed to be a celebration, but for Rachel and Jay, it would turn into a nightmare. Armed with the documents and evidence Mrs. J had collected, we walked into that room, ready to expose everything. It was surreal, seeing Rachel in that space again, smiling, pretending like everything was fine. Jay was there too, his usual smug grin plastered on his face, clearly thinking he was untouchable. But little did they know, their world was about to come crashing down. The moment arrived when Mrs. J made her move. She had arranged for the evidence to be presented on a projector for everyone to see. It wasn't just a few photos or screenshots. It was the full extent of Rachel's manipulations, laid out in front of an entire room full of people. Emails detailing her exploitation of her co-workers, texts between her and Jay, even recordings of private conversations where they'd plotted their next steps. Every lie, every betrayal, was exposed for the world to see. The fallout was immediate. Rachel's face drained of color. Her confident posture faltered, and for the first time, I saw the woman I thought I knew slip into panic. She tried to speak, tried to justify herself, but the room was already full of judgment. The truth had spoken louder than her lies ever could. Jay, on the other hand, tried to act like he was above it all, but it was clear that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. People who had once admired him now turned away, disgusted by his involvement in Rachel's schemes. In an instant, both Rachel and Jay were asked to leave the company. Their professional lives, their reputations, shattered in the blink of an eye. And there I was, standing at the back of the room, watching it all unfold. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from standing tall, knowing the truth has been spoken and justice has been served. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence around me was enough. Rachel had done everything in her power to paint me as the villain, but now it was clear who the true manipulator was. The feeling of vindication was almost overwhelming, but I didn't let it consume me. I had already let go of the need for revenge. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my self-worth. As I walked out of that room, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted off my shoulders. I was done with Rachel, done with the lies, done with the manipulations. I wasn't going to waste another minute on her, or on any of the people who had sided with her. I had learned a hard lesson, but it had changed me. I wasn't the same person I was when I first walked out of that apartment. I was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, I was free. Before I move on to this new chapter of my life, I want to know, have you ever been in a situation where the truth was hidden, and you had to fight to uncover it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're ready to take control of your story, like and share this video, because trust me, this is just the beginning of a whole new journey.